You can post all the Paris pictures you want. Everyone back home knows what you did. Justin's voice filled my ear, clipped and breathless through the voicemail. I stood frozen in the arrivals terminal of Charles de Gaulle Airport. Beyond the massive glass windows, the Parisian night swallowed the runway lights. The hard plastic wheels of my suitcase vibrated against the tile floor as I stepped out of the way of passing travelers. My fingers were stiff, gripping the phone tight enough to hurt. The bitter scent of burnt espresso drifted from a nearby kiosk, mixing with the recycled air of the terminal. I swiped my thumb across the screen. 50 missed calls. A dozen texts. The last one, sent by my brother just as I lost cell service over the Atlantic, sat at the very top. The kids are at your door. My throat went completely dry. I did not pause to process the threat. I dialed Evelyn Moore, my next-door neighbor in Cincinnati. Evelyn picked up on the first ring. "Megan, where on earth are you?" "I just landed in France," I said, forcing the words out. "Are Chloe and Mason there? Are they safe?" "They are safe," Evelyn answered. A sharp exhale followed. "I found them on your porch at 6 in the morning, 2 little suitcases and not a single adult in sight. I brought them inside and called the police." I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed a hand to my forehead. I manage community library programs for a living. At 35, I am the person people call when a reading event falls apart or a budget needs fixing. I solve problems. But this was my brother, leaving a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old on a dark porch. "Where are they now?" I asked. "The police contacted your mother. Linda came and picked them up an hour ago." I thanked Evelyn and ended the call. The terminal crowd pushed past me, a blur of heavy coats and foreign conversations. My mind dragged me back to the night before my flight. Justin had called, skipping any greeting to issue an order. "You have to stay home and watch our kids." When I reminded him I had booked this trip a year ago and saved for 3, his wife Nicole shouted from the background, "Family comes first." I had told them no. The refusal was clear. A text message confirming my stance went out before I packed my bags and locked the door at 4 in the morning. Sitting in my driveway, I had even checked my boarding pass and my library shift schedule, tapping my blue Paris savings notebook against the steering wheel. The sun was still sleeping when I left. He brought them anyway. My phone buzzed in my palm. An unfamiliar Ohio number flashed on the screen. I answered, and a male voice identified himself as an officer with the Cincinnati police. "Miss Collins, we are following up on an abandonment report at your residence. Your brother dropped his children off at 5:15 this morning. He did not wait for anyone to open the door. We reviewed your doorbell camera footage. The terminal noise seemed to fade. Justin had looked at a dark house, left his kids in the cold, and driven away." "Did you agree to watch these children this weekend?" the officer asked. "No," I said. The word came out sharp and absolute. "I absolutely did not." "Understood. We verified identities, and your mother has temporary custody for the weekend. We will be in touch." The call ended, but notifications began pouring in. My family group chat was a barrage of blue and gray text bubbles. My aunt accused me of abandoning my responsibilities. Justin had posted a massive paragraph about how I took advantage of everyone. Then, a message from my mother appeared. "After all the money your father and I have paid you, how could you do this?" I stopped walking. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, annoying hum. I stared at the words. Paid me? I had watched Chloe and Mason for 3 years. I gave up my weekends. I canceled dates. I never asked for a single dime. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed a reply. "What money?" Before I could hit send, another message from my mother popped up. 36 payments. I blinked. The text vanished. She had deleted it, but the screen had already burned those words into my memory. 36 payments. I looked out at the dark Paris sky. The trip I had saved for was just beginning, but the life I left behind was already over. I stood by the baggage carousel and called my mother. My suitcase circled past me twice before she finally answered, her breath hitching like she had been crying. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What 36 payments?" Silence stretched over the line. Then came the practiced, exhausted sigh she always used to end arguments before they started. "Megan, please," my mother said. "Your father and I have sent $1,200 every month for 3 years. Justin said you preferred cash to keep the taxes simple, and you did not want us bringing it up. Why are you doing this to us?" My fingers went numb against the hard plastic of my phone case. 3 years. That was exactly how long I had been giving up my weekends for Chloe and Mason. "Where did you send this money?" I asked. "Justin handles it for the whole family," she replied, her tone sharpening with a defensive edge. "He takes care of the logistics. You know that." I ended the call and let my arm drop. Before I could process the betrayal, a new voicemail notification popped up. "Justin." I held the phone back up to my ear. My brother sounded entirely too calm, dripping with that artificial concern he usually reserved for his country club friends. "Meg, the police overreacted," Justin said. "All you have to do is call them back and say you agreed to take the kids but changed your mind at the last minute. If you do not fix this, I am going to have to explain to Chloe and Mason that their aunt chose a vacation over them." He wanted me to lie to the police to save his reputation. My jaw tightened so hard my teeth ached. The train ride into the city offered no comfort. Paris had fully surrendered to the night, and the dark glass of the window only reflected my own pale face, broken occasionally by passing streetlights. Every metallic rattle of the tracks reminded me of the little wheels on Chloe and Mason's suitcases dragging across my concrete porch. I pulled my blue notebook from my tote bag. The pages were filled with my careful tracking of the Paris Savings Fund. Beside almost every deposit was a tiny note about a canceled plan. Skipped dinner with friends, missed movie night, gave up a Sunday shift. All because Justin needed emergency childcare. I thought I was being a good sister, but my family thought I was an employee. A text from Evelyn broke my concentration. My neighbor had just finished talking to the police and wanted to give me an update. "Thought you should know," Evelyn wrote. "The kids were packed for a whole weekend. Swimsuits, allergy medicine, even an envelope of cash for pizza. And Chloe told me something strange. She said her dad told her you always complain about watching them even though you get paid." Justin had planned this down to the allergy medicine. He had packed those bags the night before, knowing exactly what he was going to do. I opened my banking app right there on the train. My thumbs moved frantically, swiping through 36 months of transaction history. Checking account, savings account. I even checked the closed accounts tab. There was not a single transfer from my brother or my parents. After creating a new folder on my phone titled "What Money?" I saved every bank statement. Then I texted my father. "Dad, send me the bank statements and any receipts proving you paid me. Do not talk to Justin first." My phone buzzed again, this time with a barrage of notifications from the family group chat. Justin had posted a massive paragraph about how I used childcare money to fund my luxury vacation. Our relatives were already chiming in with their disappointment. Nicole added her own comment right at the bottom. "You were paid to be reliable. Family comes first, Megan." Instead of typing a defensive paragraph or explaining about the dark porch, I sent one simple question. "Nicole, can you show me one single payment that reached my account?" 2 minutes later, an image appeared in the chat. Nicole had uploaded a screenshot of a bank transfer. The amount was $1,200. The recipient name read Megan Childcare. A cold prickle of adrenaline washed over my shoulders. I zoomed in on the picture. The last 4 digits of the routing number did not match my bank. I looked closer. Right below my name was an email address, listed as the contact for the account. It was a ridiculous old email I had created in high school and abandoned long before Chloe was even born. I pressed Nicole's contact name and called her directly. She answered after 4 rings, the silence on her end heavy and defensive. "Justin told me you still use that account," Nicole said, her voice tight. I watched the lights of Paris blur past the window. "Nicole," I said, "Justin is the only person who ever had the password to that email." Morning light spilled across the unmade bed of my hotel room, catching the dust motes dancing in the cold air. A forgotten cup of tea sat on the nightstand next to my phone. An email notification suddenly broke the quiet of the room. My father had sent a message with the subject line containing only the word records. The attachment loaded slowly on the hotel wireless network. A scanned piece of paper finally filled the screen. It was a handwritten receipt acknowledging a cash payment for babysitting, and at the bottom sat my signature. The loop of the initial letter looked right, but the final stroke dragged down instead of curling up. The forgery did not capture my attention for long because my eyes drifted up to the date written at the top. My work calendar took only a few seconds to open in a new tab. Our relatives always joked about my obsession with saving schedules and shift swaps, calling me neurotic for documenting every waking hour. That tiny habit was about to tear my brother's entire story apart. The date on the receipt matched a weekend I was not even in Cincinnati. I had been hosting a library seminar in Columbus. My inbox still held the hotel invoice paid by the city, the official invitation, email, and photos of me standing at a podium 3 hours away from my brother's house. After attaching the hotel receipt and the seminar photos to a new email, I sent them to my father. The body of the message contained a single demand: send me the rest of them. The phone rang before the laptop screen could even dim. My mother's voice trembled through the speaker, thick with fresh tears and exhaustion. "Megan, please," Linda begged, her breath hitching. "Maybe Justin just signed your name for convenience. You know how busy he gets with his work and the kids." I stared at the peeling floral wallpaper near the window. "Mom, if he actually handed me the cash, why would he need to forge my signature later for convenience?" Silence stretched over the line. She had no answer for the obvious flaw in her defense. "I will not accuse anyone until I see the entire paper trail," I told her, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "But I will not lie to the police about the kids, and I will absolutely not apologize." The call ended with a soft click. My screen immediately lit up with a private text message from Justin. He offered a generous deal. If I told the authorities I had simply forgotten my promise to watch his children, he would forget about my little Paris stunt. The next message dropped the diplomatic pretense entirely. "If you make Mom and Dad choose sides, you will never see Chloe and Mason again." My chest tightened so hard it became difficult to breathe. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my blue notebook, running a thumb over the worn cover. The past 3 years suddenly looked completely different. Memories of a tense Thanksgiving dinner surfaced, where my parents barely spoke to me after I refused to babysit so Justin could go golfing. An image of my own birthday dinner followed, when I had to leave early for a shift and my brother called me ungrateful in front of the whole table. They had not just been favoring their son. My parents honestly believed I was taking their money and refusing to do the work. An email chime broke through the rush of old memories. Robert had sent a massive document file. I downloaded the attachment and scrolled through 36 individual receipts, 36 forged signatures, copied so exactly they looked traced. Some dates lined up with my actual weekend shifts at the library, surrounded by coworkers and security cameras. Another receipt fell on a week I had the flu and never left my apartment. The last page of the file contained a forwarded email from Justin to my parents. "Megan confirmed she received everything. She just does not want you discussing money with her." I scrolled back to the very first receipt, the one dated for the weekend of my Columbus Library seminar. Right below the line that read "paid in cash after overnight care," a second name caught my eye. A witness line had been filled out in blue ink. Nicole Collins. My sister-in-law had signed her name, legally confirming she watched Justin hand me cash on a day I was completely out of town. I tapped my sister-in-law's name on my phone screen and waited. Nicole answered on the second ring, breathing heavily like she was already preparing for a fight. Before she could launch into another speech about family loyalty, I brought up the document sitting on my laptop screen. "You signed as a witness for a cash payment on a weekend I was presenting at a library conference in Columbus," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "Did you actually see Justin hand me that money?" Nicole let out a sharp, defensive breath. She accused me of trying to shift the blame, insisting she had seen my brother hand me cash on plenty of other occasions. "Where?" I asked. "In your kitchen," Nicole snapped back. "The receipt you signed is dated for a Tuesday," I told her. "I was 3 hours away in a hotel, and Justin was at work. Did you even check the dates before you signed?" The line went completely quiet. For the first time since my plane landed, my brother's wife had nothing to say. When Nicole finally spoke again, her voice lost some of its righteous edge. She confessed that Justin usually handed her a thick stack of receipts at the end of every month. He would point to the witness lines while she was busy cooking dinner or getting the kids ready for bed, claiming the dates had already been verified with me. Because she trusted her husband, she rarely read the actual pages and almost never witnessed the physical exchange of money. "It was just a family procedure," Nicole pleaded, desperate to justify her blind trust. "Signing a legal document to confirm something you never saw is a choice," I replied. "You let him use your name, and being tricked does not erase the fact that you left 2 children on a freezing porch." A security notification buzzed against my ear during our silence. My home camera app had finally restored its overnight cloud backup. I pulled the phone away and opened the video file, putting Nicole on speaker. The clip lasted less than 2 minutes. The footage showed Justin dragging 2 small suitcases up my porch steps in the dark. He rang the bell exactly once, glanced at the pitch-black front window, and immediately turned around. Chloe yelled after his car, but the taillights just disappeared down the street. My brother looked entirely calm the whole time, abandoning his own kids without a single hesitation. I saved the video and sent it directly to Nicole. Her response came through almost instantly. She claimed Justin had shown her a text message proving I had agreed to take the kids at the very last minute. A screenshot arrived in our chat a second later. The image displayed a message supposedly sent from my phone, reading, "Fine, bring them at 5. I opened my actual text thread with Justin, scrolled to that exact timestamp, and took my own screenshot. My real conversation showed no such message. After sending the proof back to her, I explained that anyone could use a fake texting app to generate a picture. "He showed me the bank transfers too," Nicole whispered, her defense crumbling rapidly. "The account name always said Megan Childcare." I closed my eyes and rubbed my temple. Anyone can change the display nickname on a checking account. "Did you ever see the actual official bank statements?" She did not answer, and the call disconnected. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. The caller ID showed Nicole, but when I answered, I could barely hear her. She was speaking in a frantic whisper, the hollow echo of a tiled bathroom surrounding her words. My sister-in-law told me she had locked the door and opened Justin's laptop while he was downstairs. Hidden deep in his files, she found a completely separate savings account. Every single month, on the exact day my parents transferred their money, that hidden account received a deposit of $1,200. A heavy knock suddenly echoed through the phone speaker. "Who are you talking to in there?" Justin demanded. His muffled voice carried through the bathroom door, thick with suspicion. Nicole let out a tiny gasp. "There is more," she whispered into the receiver, her voice trembling. "He did not spend the money on the kids." The sound of a doorknob twisting violently came through the line. The call went dead. The line stayed dead for 2 hours. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and watched the battery icon on my screen drain, jumping at every passing siren outside the window. When the notification finally chimed, it was not a phone call. Nicole had sent a massive encrypted file containing the real bank statements. My parents' transfers flowed directly into my brother's primary checking account, and the outbound transactions painted a very clear picture of his priorities. The money never turned into cash withdrawals. Instead, it vanished into monthly payments for a brand new luxury SUV, expensive country club dues, and premium credit card bills. Every time I had canceled a weekend plan to watch his children, Justin had been using my supposed wages to fund wine tasting trips and golf excursions. Nicole called a few minutes later, her voice tight and defensive. She admitted she thought the money from my parents was just a general family subsidy, a way to help with their overall budget. "I really thought he was paying you from his own paycheck," Nicole pleaded, though the excuse sounded hollow even to her. "It was just so convenient having you there whenever we needed a night off, so I never asked too many questions." I did not offer her absolution. "You liked the convenience, and you used a guilt trip about family coming first to keep your free babysitter." She quietly hung up, leaving me alone with the digital paper trail. I set up my laptop on the small desk and initiated a video call with my parents. Robert answered first, his face pale against the harsh glow of his own monitor, while Linda hovered nervously over his shoulder. I shared my screen and walked them through the bank statements Nicole had provided. My father stopped speaking the moment he saw the vehicle loan payments. He stared at the screen, watching the money he intended for his daughter buy his son a leather interior and heated seats. Linda gripped the back of Robert's chair. "Maybe this is just a terrible miscommunication," my mother offered, desperate to soften the blow. "Maybe he got the accounts confused." "Dad," I said, pointing to a specific column on the spreadsheet. "Read the memo you typed on the very first transfer." Robert cleared his throat, his voice barely a rasp. "Payment for Megan's childcare work." Neither of them spoke after that, so I ended the meeting and left the hotel. The crisp Parisian air bit at my cheeks as I walked toward a historic library near the river. I did not care about the tourist attractions or the famous bakeries today. Standing in front of the massive stone columns, looking up at centuries of preserved archives, I finally understood my own profession. Librarians exist to protect the record, ensuring that nobody gets to rewrite history just because they speak the loudest. I pulled the blue notebook from my tote bag, found a blank page past all my canceled plans, and wrote down 3 rules for the rest of this trip. Clear my name, protect Chloe and Mason, make Justin repay every single dollar. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Justin had completely dropped the victim act. He offered me $10,000 to delete the doorbell camera footage, tell the police I had agreed to babysit, and cut all contact with Nicole. I took a screenshot of the bribe, saved it to my hidden folder, and replied with a single question. Why did you think that money belonged to you? 3 gray typing bubbles danced on the screen. They stopped, started again, and finally produced a response. I handled the schedules. I dealt with Mom and Dad. I earned that money more than you did. I captured that confession too, marveling at the sheer arrogance required to put that in writing. The screen went dark, but a phone call immediately broke the silence. Robert's name flashed across the display. Your mother wants us to handle this inside the family, my father said, his voice harder than I had ever heard it. He paused, a ragged breath rattling through the receiver. But Justin just asked me to sign a legal statement for the police, swearing that you were paid in cash. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Did you sign it, Dad? No, Robert replied, the word dropping like a stone. Your mother did. A blurry photograph loaded onto my phone screen, sent directly from my father. The image showed a single sheet of paper resting on their granite kitchen counter. The document contained a brief paragraph stating that, to the best of her knowledge, my mother believed I received cash payments for babysitting. At the bottom of the page sat her unmistakable handwriting. The ink looked fresh. I dialed her number immediately. Linda answered on the first ring, her voice tight and defensive. She told me she just wanted to prevent a family misunderstanding from turning into a criminal investigation. Family comes before money, my mother pleaded, trying to use her softest, most reasonable tone. He left 2 children on a freezing porch, I told her, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles popped. Justin forged my name. He forged his wife's name. He stole from you. And your response was to sign a paper calling me a thief. A wet sniffle came through the speaker. Linda asked if I could just find it in my heart to forgive him, so her grandchildren would not lose their father. My jaw ached from clenching it. I asked my mother why every mistake Justin made somehow became the fault of the person holding him accountable, and then I hung up. Robert called back minutes later. My father promised he had refused to sign anything. The man sounded incredibly old, his voice carrying the weight of massive regret. He agreed to provide the original bank statements, the emails, and the devices used to receive the fake receipts. I told him not to delete or edit a single file. I did not cut my trip short. The rest of my time in Paris belonged to me, and I spent it walking through museums and sitting in quiet cafes, gathering my strength. When I finally returned to Cincinnati a week later, I did not warn my family. Evelyn met me in my driveway as I pulled in from the airport. My neighbor handed over a thick envelope containing a copy of the official police report and her handwritten notes documenting the exact time she found the kids. I thanked her and walked up to my front door. Faint tracks from tiny suitcase wheels still marked the dust on the porch. The life I left behind a week ago was completely gone. Inside, I cleared off my dining room table and laid everything out. The physical evidence formed 4 distinct piles. One stack held the police report and neighbor testimony about the abandonment. A second contained the bank statements proving my parents transferred the money. A third held the 36 fake receipts. The final pile consisted of printed screenshots of my brother's smear campaign in our group chat. I cross-referenced the fake receipts with my printed library schedule. Justin had claimed I was watching his kids on dates when I had been standing in front of dozens of coworkers and library security cameras. My phone buzzed on the table. Justin somehow knew I was back in town. A text message lit up the screen. If you embarrass me, you will never see the kids again. A second message arrived. Message arrived immediately after. It contained a digital invitation to our parents' 40th wedding anniversary party, scheduled for that coming weekend. Justin had attached a short note to the invite. Come apologize in person. The doorbell suddenly rang, pulling my attention away from the screen. I walked to the front window and peered through the blinds. Nicole stood on my porch. Chloe and Mason were waiting down the driveway inside her parked car. I opened the door, but my sister-in-law did not try to step inside. Her hands were shaking. She looked over her shoulder toward the street before turning back to me. Justin is planning a toast at the anniversary party, Nicole whispered, her voice barely carrying over the evening breeze. He printed out pictures from your Paris trip. He is going to tell everyone in the room that you stole Mom and Dad's money. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small black flash drive, pressing it into my palm. This has the real account history, Nicole said, her eyes welling with tears. Every single transaction. If he finds out I copied it, my marriage is over. I looked at the flash drive. feeling the cold metal against my skin, and then looked back at the woman who had helped lock me in a cage of guilt for 3 years. "Nicole," I said, my voice quiet and steady, "your marriage was already over. You just did not know it." The mahogany desk in the downtown law office smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Mr. Davies, a civil attorney with 30 years of experience, slid my folder back across the polished wood. His advice was entirely practical. Preserve the original digital files. Maintain the email chains. Because my parents were the ones who actually transferred the funds, their testimony would be the anchor of any legal action. Fraud investigations took months, the lawyer warned, and a banquet hall was not a courtroom. The party would merely serve as a place to correct the public record. My mother arrived at my house the next morning, clutching a crumpled tissue in her hand. Linda stood in the entryway and begged me to leave the bank documents at home. She called the anniversary celebration one of the last days our family would ever be whole. I looked at the woman who had signed a legal statement calling her own daughter a thief. Our family was not whole, I told her. It was simply quiet. I promised not to bring up the money, provided my brother did not attack me first. Nicole slipped through the front door later that afternoon. My sister-in-law looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with dark circles. She placed a handwritten timeline on the dining table, along with printed copies of Justin's text messages bragging about the money. She finally admitted her own part in the disaster. Using the phrase about family coming first had been her way of justifying the convenience of a free babysitter. When Nicole asked if I could keep her involvement secret to protect her custody chances, I shook my head. Promising to control a blast radius was a lie I refused to tell. Heavy footsteps announced my father's arrival an hour later. Robert placed a thick stack of paper directly over Nicole's timeline. 36 wire transfer confirmations sat in a neat pile. He stared at the wood grain, a deep shame settling in his shoulders. He swore he would never let his son use his retirement money to destroy my reputation. I did not offer quick forgiveness to smooth over his guilt. If he truly wanted to fix his mistake, I explained, he had to open his mouth and speak the truth out loud when the time came. The banquet hall featured a large projector system for a family photo slideshow. Because my father had paid the deposit for the venue, he possessed the legal authority to dictate the equipment usage. Robert instructed the event coordinator to load my backup folder onto the main laptop. The contents were incredibly simple: a timeline, the transfer records, one forged receipt, the mismatched account screenshot, the doorbell camera video. No hacking was required, just a quiet insurance policy resting on the desktop screen. While I was zipping up my dress for the party, my phone rang. Justin offered one last chance for redemption. He suggested I stand up during the toasts, apologize to the extended relatives, and call the missing funds a massive misunderstanding. Playing my part perfectly would earn me the right to see my niece and nephew again. "What happens if I tell the truth?" I asked the mirror. A low chuckle came through the receiver. "No one will believe you over me." The hallway outside the banquet room smelled of roasted garlic and expensive floral arrangements. Beyond the heavy double doors, a microphone whined with a sharp burst of feedback. The chatter of 50 relatives died down. Justin's voice boomed through the overhead speakers, smooth and practiced. To the family members who showed up, and the ones who choose croissants over children, laughter echoed from the crowd inside. My mother stepped close and grabbed my wrist, her fingers cold and trembling against my skin. "Please," Linda whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "Just let him have this one night." I looked down at her hand, and then up at the heavy wooden doors. I slipped my wrist out of my mother's grip and pushed the heavy wooden doors open. The clinking of silverware stopped immediately, and dozens of faces turned toward the entrance, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. At the front of the room, my brother stood holding a microphone, a practiced smile plastered across his face. Chloe shifted in her chair and tried to run toward me, but Nicole gently pulled her daughter back down. My sister-in-law kept her eyes glued to the tablecloth. I walked past the empty seat next to my mother and sat down beside my father and Evelyn. The projector screen behind the podium displayed a faded photograph from my parents' wedding day. A second later, the image switched. A picture I had taken near the Seine filled the massive screen. Justin chuckled into the microphone, shaking his head with exaggerated disappointment. He told the room about an aunt who received a generous salary for childcare, only to abandon those same children to go find herself in Europe. Nervous laughter rippled through the banquet hall. Two of my older cousins glared at me from the next table. I did not rush the stage or reach for his microphone. I simply stood up and let my chair scrape loudly against the hardwood floor. "How much was I paid?" I asked, projecting my voice across the silent room. Justin leaned into the mic, oozing confidence. $1,200 a month. For 3 entire years. I turned my body away from him and looked directly at the head table. "Dad, did you send that money for me?" Robert sat up perfectly straight. "Yes. Did either of you ever send it to my account?" I asked, letting the question hang in the thick air. My father did not answer with words. He reached across the table and pressed a single key on the laptop controlling the presentation. The screen flickered, and the entire narrative of the evening changed. The Paris photograph vanished, replaced by a massive spreadsheet documenting 36 individual bank transfers. Every single deposit flowed straight into a checking account registered exclusively to my brother. The next slide showed my completely empty bank statements, followed by the fake screenshot bearing that old high school email address. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the relatives who had judged me moments before. $43,200, I said. That is what my brother collected in my name. Justin opened his mouth, his confident smile finally slipping, but I was not finished. I pulled my blue notebook from my purse and dropped it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. He provided 36 signed receipts to prove he handed me cash, I told the crowd. I pointed toward the screen as a side-by-side comparison appeared. This receipt claims I was paid after an overnight stay in Cincinnati. My work calendar proves I was running a library seminar in Columbus that exact day. This other receipt claims I was watching Chloe and Mason, but the date matches the exact afternoon I sat in the hospital waiting room while Mom had her gallbladder removed. Family finances are private, Justin snapped, his voice echoing too loudly through the speakers. And none of this changes the fact that you agreed to watch my kids and then left them to freeze outside your house. Robert pressed another button. The doorbell camera footage began to play. The entire banquet hall watched Justin drop 2 suitcases on a dark porch, ring the bell once, and drive away from his own children without waiting for a single light to turn on inside the house. Nicole stood up slowly, her hands gripping the edge of her table. "He lied to me," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "He showed me a fake text message saying Megan agreed to take them. I should have checked. I should have never let him leave them there, and I will regret that choice for the rest of my life." The room remained dead silent, save for the hum of the projector fan. Justin glared at his wife, the last piece of his polished mask crumbling into pure resentment. His face flushed a dark, angry red. "You have no husband and no kids," he spat at me, dropping all pretense of being the victim. "Your time is not worth the same as ours. I handled the schedules, and I handled the parents." He gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward. "I earned that money." At least 3 cell phones were pointed directly at the stage, their recording lights blinking in the dim room. He realized what he had just confessed a second too late. Footsteps clicked across the hardwood floor. Linda bypassed my table and walked straight toward the podium. A collective breath held in the room, everyone expecting the matriarch to protect her golden child one last time. My mother stepped up to the stage and gently took the microphone from her son's hand. She turned to face the stunned crowd. "I signed a legal statement for you this morning because I thought I was saving this family," Linda said, her voice echoing off the walls. She looked back at Justin, her expression entirely empty. "Tomorrow, your father and I are taking every single receipt to the police." All the color drained from my brother's face. Morning brought no grand sense of victory, only a heavy exhaustion that made my bones ache. The family group chat remained completely silent. Justin had scrubbed his aggressive post from the feed overnight, replacing his public outrage with a lengthy email sent directly to my parents. My brother claimed he was merely holding the funds temporarily to support his household during a difficult financial quarter. Robert ignored the pathetic excuse. My father drove Linda to the precinct right after breakfast to submit their official report, carrying copies of every forged receipt and bank transfer. I drove down an hour later to hand over my camera footage and my completely empty account statements. Nicole did not wait around to hear her husband explain his way out of the disaster. She packed Chloe and Mason into her sedan and drove straight to her parents' house across town. Within a week, a family law attorney helped her establish a formal custody schedule, and she immediately enrolled the kids in an official after-school program. My brother's wife never once asked me to watch them. When we finally met for coffee, Nicole stirred her cup slowly, staring down at the dark liquid. Justin had blamed both of us for destroying the family with our betrayal. I told her that speaking the truth was not a betrayal, and she nodded quietly without looking up. Mr. Davies, the attorney I had consulted before the anniversary party, drafted a formal civil demand letter for the entire sum plus legal fees. Justin responded through his own lawyer with a desperate counteroffer. He proposed repaying $20,000, provided our parents withdrew their police report, and called the entire situation a bookkeeping error. Robert refused the deal immediately. Linda stared at the kitchen counter and said absolutely nothing. 4 months crept by in a frustrating blur of bureaucratic delays and investigator interviews. Tracking the money flow required verifying emails, analyzing signatures, and subpoenaing financial records. The justice system moved with agonizing slowness, but the financial consequences hit my brother immediately. To afford his defense attorney and begin setting aside the demanded restitution, Justin had to sell his luxury SUV. A few weeks later, a neighbor mentioned that the local country club had revoked his membership over severely delinquent dues. The protective bubble around the golden child was rapidly losing its air. Desperation finally drove Justin to use his most effective weapon. He brought Chloe and Mason to my parents' house for a rare weekend visit, making sure to casually mention that his children might never see their grandparents again if a criminal trial destroyed his life. Linda called me the moment his car left the driveway. Her voice cracked as she begged me to reconsider, asking if we could just write off the fake signatures as sloppy family accounting to keep the peace. I listened to the quiet sobbing on the other end of the line, feeling a familiar weight trying to settle onto my shoulders. I told the woman who raised me that the choice belonged entirely to her, and I refused to carry the guilt for a mess I did not create. The investigating detective made the stakes incredibly clear during a follow-up phone call. Because my parents originated the wire transfers, their testimony regarding the purpose of that money served as the foundation of the fraud case. If my mother withdrew her complaint, Justin could easily claim the funds were a general family loan, significantly reducing his liability. Late that evening, a quiet knock pulled me away from reading a book on my couch. I opened the front door to find Linda shivering on my porch, clutching her purse tight against her chest. I stepped aside to let her in, and she walked straight to my dining room table. My mother reached into her bag and pulled out 2 crisp white envelopes, placing them gently on the wood surface. The first envelope held a completed, notarized affidavit confirming Justin had stolen the money and forged the documents. The second contained a handwritten letter from my brother, explicitly stating that if she submitted that legal document, she would never be allowed to speak to Chloe or Mason again. Linda pushed both envelopes across the table toward me, her hands shaking violently. "Tell me which child I am supposed to lose," she whispered. I looked at the wrinkled, terrified face of my mother, and I did not reach for either envelope. The 2 crisp envelopes sat completely untouched on my dining room table. I looked at the woman who had spent 40 years smoothing over every crack my brother ever made in our foundation, watching her tremble under the weight of an impossible choice. "You are not choosing which child to lose, Mom," I said, keeping my voice entirely steady. "Justin is choosing whether his children are weapons." I stepped back, putting physical space between myself and the table. My mother stared at the blank wall behind me for a long time, and the silence in the house grew deafening. Finally, her shoulders dropped. She reached into her purse, pulled out a blue pen, and signed the official affidavit against her son. The justice system did not deliver a swift cinematic verdict. 8 agonizing months passed before Justin finally folded, accepting a plea agreement rather than dragging his ruined reputation through a public trial. The prosecutor secured a strict probation term and a mandatory repayment plan for the entire $43,200. My brother also lost his most valuable shield. Robert completely overhauled the family trust, removing Justin from any future role, managing the estate, and transferring all current banking access to a neutral financial advisor. Linda took her own steps toward accountability. My mother spent her autumn calling every aunt and cousin who had attended the anniversary party, making sure they knew exactly where the childcare money had gone. The golden child no longer had a public relations manager to cover his tracks, and his pristine image shattered beyond repair. Nicole secured primary custody during the initial separation. She returned to working full-time, hired a licensed afternoon childcare service, and paid the daily rate herself. When we met for coffee in late October, my brother's wife offered a simple apology. No excuses or justifications followed her words. I thanked her for speaking the truth, But I also made it clear that a single conversation would not erase 3 years of manipulation. Trust required new actions, and we would have to build it slowly. The first restitution check arrived in my mailbox just before Thanksgiving. I did not use the funds for a sudden shopping spree or an extravagant purchase. A portion went toward a summer reading program at my library, and the rest slipped right into a brand new savings account. My blue notebook remained on my desk, though I stopped using the back pages to document canceled dinners and lost weekends. I only wrote down the things I actually planned to accomplish. A cold Tuesday afternoon brought an unexpected phone call. Nicole found herself stuck with a mandatory office training session, leaving her without coverage for Chloe and Mason. She asked if I could watch them for exactly 3 hours. For the first time in my life, a request for help did not feel like a heavy chain locking around my neck. My chest did not tighten, and my throat did not go dry. I looked at my library calendar, noting the clear schedule, and realized the power to say no rested entirely in my own hands. "I can take them," I told Nicole over the phone. "Drop them off at the library at 4. I agreed because I wanted to show my niece and nephew the new photography exhibit on the second floor, not because an invisible family obligation forced me to surrender my afternoon. The winter sun slanted through the tall glass windows of the community library, illuminating a dozen framed photographs of the Parisian skyline. Chloe stood beside me, studying a wide shot of the river. She looked up, her expression far too serious for a child. "Does family still come first?" I placed a hand gently on her shoulder and guided her toward the next photograph. "Real family does not make one person come last." A small display case near the exit held a collection of travel journals donated by local residents. My blue notebook rested on the top shelf, open to a fresh page, while the old entries detailing my canceled dreams remained safely hidden behind the binding. For the first time in my life, no one else had written my name into their plans. I looked through the glass at the fresh ink shining under the gallery lights. Next trip. My choice. Sometimes, the hardest truth to accept is that the people who share your blood can be the ones most willing to take advantage of your heart. When you grow up constantly hearing that family comes first, it is incredibly easy to mistake one-sided sacrifice for love. But this story reveals a very practical, grounding lesson. Loyalty should never be weaponized against you. When someone expects you to cancel your plans, drain your resources, and silence your own needs just to make their life easier, they are not asking for family support. They are demanding your self-erasure. You do not have to be the invisible infrastructure holding everyone else's life together while your own dreams get pushed to the background. Setting a firm boundary with an exploitative relative is never a betrayal. It is a necessary act of survival. You have every right to demand accountability, to ask for the receipts, and to refuse to carry the weight of someone else's lies just to maintain a fake peace. Real family does not require you to permanently stand at the back of the line. It requires mutual respect, honesty, and the fundamental understanding that your time is just as valuable as theirs. Walking away from financial or emotional manipulation does not make you the villain. It simply makes you a person who finally recognized their own worth. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where the phrase, "family comes first," was used to trap you into sacrificing your own happiness? How did you finally find the courage to draw a line and reclaim your own life? Share your experiences in the comments below, because someone listening right now might desperately need to hear exactly how you found your way out.